This is pemmican. It's food from the 18th and 19th centuries, originally made by indigenous peoples of North America and then used by voyagers, frontiersmen, and explorers alike. It is a highly condensed, nutritious form of food. It's, in fact, the ultimate survival food. Over the next few episodes, we're going to talk about exactly what pemmican is, how it was made historically, how you can make it in your modern kitchen, and also how we can cook with it, whether it's at home, at an historical event, or in your next survival outing. I want to thank you for joining us today on 18th Century Cooking with James Townsend and Son. Pemmican was traditionally made of just 2 or 3 ingredients: dried meat, animal fats, and dried berries. At the height of its production, from the late 18th century to the mid-19th century, the vast majority of it was made with bison, although at times deer, moose, and elk were used, depending upon availability. A group of people called the Métis were most famous for their pemmican. The Métis were a unique people group with their own cultural identity. They originated from the descendants of French voyageurs and their Native American wives. They were responsible for most of the pemmican that was sold and traded throughout the northern regions of North America. The Métis people developed an entire societal structure based upon the buffalo hunt. While the men hunted buffalo, the women processed them. Period accounts say that a skilled Métis woman could dismantle up to 10 buffalo carcasses a day, leaving very little behind for the wild animals to scavenge. Once the usable portions of the animal were harvested, they'd be processed over the next few days. The meat was cut into thin strips and laid out on wooden racks to dry near the fire and in the heat of the sun. The skins were stripped of their hair and sewn into rawhide bags that would be used to store the pemmican. Suet was melted and refined into tallow, and the bones were cracked and the delicate marrow extracted. A single bison cow, when processed properly, would produce about 250 pounds of raw meat, or about 50 pounds of dried meat. This same cow would produce also about 50 pounds of rendered tallow. The dried meat was pulverized and placed into rawhide bags. Sometimes dried berries were mixed in. Then the liquid suet was poured in over the top and mixed in well. Then the bag was sewn shut. Pemmican produced and stored in this fashion would last a long time. Some reports suggest 10, 20, even 30 years. It was the ultimate survival food. In our next episode, we'll show you how you can make this authentic pemmican at home. In our last episode, I showed you how pemmican, the ultimate survival food, was made in the 18th and 19th centuries. Today, I'm going to show you how you can easily make it in a modern kitchen so that you can use it at your next historical reenactment, your survival outing, or even your next camping trip. Thanks for joining us today on 18th Century Cooking with James Townsend and Son. Large quantities of pemmican was made with bison. Today we're using beef. If you have access to bison or perhaps venison, you may use that instead. Bison was the obvious selection for large-scale pemmican production. Now today, the wild bison herd is very small, but during the late 1700s, great buffalo herds extended from just west of the Appalachian Mountains all the way to the Rockies, and as far south as what is now Mexico, all the way north to Arctic Canada. Many native peoples of America depended on pemmican for their survival. It kept well, and it was an excellent food source, especially during hard winter months. Pemmican was also an important food source for many voyageurs and fur traders. The demand for pemmican put a tremendous strain on the buffalo herd. There is one particular group of people called the Métis. They were descendants of early voyageurs and their native wives. The Métis produced and supplied most of the pemmican. They conducted 2 hunts per year, one in the spring and one in the fall. A single Métis hunting party could have up to 1,000 ox-drawn carts in tow and could return from the hunt with up to 1,000,000 pounds of pemmican and dried meat. And there were multiple Métis hunting parties. About half of the pemmican produced by the Métis was kept and used by them to get them through the hard winter. The remaining pemmican was sold to the Hudson Bay Company or its competitor, the Northwest Company. The pemmican sold to these companies would provision vast crews of voyageurs that used to transport their goods. It was also sold to other backwoodsmen and to outlying military posts. Competition between these two companies was fierce, so fierce that battles broke out between the employees of these companies. These battles became known as the Pemmican War. The British government eventually had to step in and settle the matter by forcing a merger between the two companies. Now back to our meat. I'm slicing this meat very thinly. I'm going to put this in my modern oven, preheated to the lowest temperature possible. You can use a dehydrator too if you wish. If you do, you ought to bake your meat strips first in your oven at 200 degrees for about a half an hour, and then you can place them into the dehydrator to dry up. The process will take between 10 and 12 hours. Your meat should be completely dry and brittle when it's done. For every pound of raw beef, you should end up with about a quarter pound of dried meat. Now, some of you are probably thinking, John, why don't you just use beef jerky instead of dried beef in this recipe? Well, typically, jerky is very highly salted, it's highly spiced, and it also contains nitrates. These all add up to a very concentrated flavor, which isn't good in pemmican. The other problem is it's cut with the grain instead of against the grain, so it's very difficult to break up into our powder. Once our meat is dry and brittle, I'm going to melt in a saucepan an equal amount by weight of suet. Today I'm using a Taurus suet in this recipe, which is available online on our website. Now you can render your own tallow from raw suet, but make sure to watch our previous episode on suet. That'll give you instructions on how to do that. Now I'm going to take my dried meat, and I could use a mortar and pestle, or even easier, I could use my food processor at home. Regardless, I want to end up with a coarse powder. I've got about 8 ounces of dried beef here. I'm going to mix in about an ounce of dried berries. Those are optional, along with 8 ounces of melted suet. A common version in the time period had ground up chokeberries. These you can find online. If you add dried berries to your pemmican, it will not keep as well. This version is called seed pemmican. Let's see what this pemmican tastes like raw. You know, there's not a lot of flavor right up front. After you chew it for a while, you get a nice little beefy flavor. The texture might turn off some, but hey, if you're tired and you're hungry, this will keep you going. And here it is, authentic pemmican. In our next episode, I'll show you how to prepare easy, delicious dishes with this wonderful mixture. Over the last couple of episodes, we've talked about pemmican, the ultimate survival food of the 18th and 19th centuries. Today, I'm going to show you one way of cooking with pemmican. Thanks for joining us today on 18th Century Cooking with James Townsend and Son. A great number of people depended on pemmican as their primary food source. Voyageurs, they were the long-haul truckers of their day. They worked long days, and their work was treacherous. They didn't have time to gather food from their surroundings. It's clear from period writings that along with their goods, they carried either kegs of salt pork or bags of pemmican. On long journeys, a person might even bury a pack of pemmican to be recovered on the return journey. Soldiers, especially those on the northern frontier, became very familiar with pemmican. By the late 19th century, it was known as the iron ration, a ration that was reserved for consumption when nothing else was available, right before a long march or a battle. Besides eating it raw, a common way of cooking with pemmican was to make it into a soup. It's called rubaboo. It's very easy to make. Start with a pot of boiling water, then cut your pemmican up into chunks. We're using seed pemmican that we made in our second episode of this series. It contains dried chokeberries, which gives the pemmican just a hint of sweet and tart. If you like,
You can add vegetables such as potatoes, carrots, parsnips, onions, or any root vegetables. To thicken this soup, they typically added flour or ship's biscuits. Even some rice would work. I'm using ship's biscuit. Right before I serve this up, I'm going to add in some greens. I've got some spinach here. Maybe you'll find some greens along the way, maybe stinging nettles. For stinging nettles, make sure to watch our other video on making stinging nettle soup. That'd be great for this too.
The word rubaboo over time took on a broader meaning. It meant a sort of a collection, a hodgepodge of all sorts of disparate things. And the reason being is because rubaboo, the food, is just that. It's your main ingredients plus whatever you had available. If you, depending on the season, whatever vegetable you could get a hold of, that's what you put in. Let's see what our rubaboo tastes like. I highly recommend this. This is excellent. Our soup did turn out a little thin, but we could obviously make this much thicker by adding more of our ship's biscuit or a little flour or even that rice. In the last several episodes, we've been learning about pemmican, the ultimate survival food. In this episode, I'm going to show you one more way of cooking with it. A popular pemmican dish from the time period. Thanks for joining us today on 18th Century Cooking with James Townsend and Son. The dish we're going to be making today was called either rousseau or rocher. It was named that by the French voyageurs. Voyageurs were the long-haul truckers of the day. Life was difficult for a voyageur. They typically worked 14-hour days transporting goods in large canoes. When they portaged their canoes, they were required to carry a minimum of 180 pounds at a time. One of the leading causes of death for voyageurs was hernias. That leads some to speculate that that's the reason why they wrapped their waists tightly with their wide sashes. Because the life of a voyageurs was so difficult, they seldom had time to gather their own food, so their employers supplied their rations. The voyageurs of the St. Lawrence River were usually issued salt pork for their ration. Nearly everyone else ate pemmican. Pemmican was either eaten raw, or made into a soup like we showed in our last episode, or made into rousseau, what some might call pemmican hash. Very easy and quick to make.
Start by cutting your pemmican into chunks. We're going to put these chunks into a fry pan or a spider over a medium heat. We don't need to add any fat to this since authentic pemmican contains about 50% tallow. Now rousseau can be as simple as that, or you can add other things to this while the meat is cooking. I'm adding a diced potato along with some chopped onions and maybe some mushrooms, a little salt, some pepper, and a bit of allspice. Don't be afraid of experimenting with your seasonings. And then top it all off with a little water to make a nice sauce. I'm also going to sprinkle a little flour over it. Stir that in well. This is ready to go. Let's give it a try.
That was really quite excellent. The onions are caramelized well. The potatoes taste great in there. The meat's finely pulverized and very flavorful. Wow, this is a wonderful hash. This is great. If you get a chance to have pemmican, try it like this.
Today, I've got some footage of a portable earthen oven project.
Thanks for joining us today on 18th Century Cooking with James Townsend and Son. Michael Dragoo, who was featured in some previous cooking episodes, he's been working on a portable oven project for an upcoming event. So we dropped everything, I grabbed the camera real quick, and we just shot some impromptu footage while we helped him work on his oven. So here you've got some of that footage. Okay, it looks like we pretty much got our sandcastle interior space figured out here. Kevin's tried to get my work to be a little bit more symmetrical. Good luck with that. So the clay mixture that Michael's made up, I took a quick look at it and it's a little dry. It's not got enough clay in it, a little too much sand. So right now he's working more clay into his it. Yeah, here's the clay mix he's working from. This was from an earlier oven project, and it broke, so he just wetted it down, which is one of the nice things. But you can see how it has very little kind of strength. You can form it up into a ball, but it doesn't really want to hold together too well, and so it feels like it definitely needs a little bit more clay. Yeah, so there's our ball. You can see that it's holding together nicely. It doesn't want to pull apart too much. We've got the nice fibers just trying to lock it together. Michael's oven is here set up at the event. He's managed to get it to the event without breaking it, and he's gonna light a little fire in it to do the very first firing in this to really get the very final drying done. We're gonna do a little small firing here just to get it warmed up to get ready for the weekend.
All the way?
Yep, just slide it all the way. You don't have to go clear to the back, but right basically into the center. You can see how it's exhausting. The first top half here has got exhaust, and the bottom section is where the cold air draws in.
What was that ratio again? Do you remember?
It's 63% or 63% of the full height is the height of the door. And that gives us the proper airflow.
Yeah.
So this firing that we're doing right now, this little firing, is just to get this dry. When Michael's ready to cook with this, he's going to have a much bigger fire in this. We've had about a half hour. You can just start to feel the top of this crown has warmed up enough that you can't feel that evaporating water. If you feel back here where it's thicker, it's definitely a little cool. You can tell that it's got some water left in it. If this gets hot too fast and this is still cold, we're going to get thermal differences and we're going to get cracks. Well, it's been about an hour and a half here, and we do have some cracks. You can see right here, it's cracked up the face, and right along here, and up over the top, stops about right here. We do have a little secondary crack here. That's very, very normal. As this heats up, it's going to do a little bit of that. You've got to expect it. Well, we've got this nice little fire. Michael's going to keep going with this for the next day or two. Just keep a very small fire in this. And then on Saturday, here at the Five Metals event here in Goshen, Indiana, he's going to fire and bake some things on it on Saturday. Well, Michael's oven was a success at the event. Everyone loved the oven, and he was able to bake with it. But it was not a success in being very portable. Number one, the oven as we built it was just too heavy. It took at least 3 people to carry it.
It was also a failure in that it broke. The tray that we built it on, we built it right up against those edges, those wood rails along the sides. That didn't give the base any room to expand. So the top expanded, but the bottom couldn't expand, so it cracked right over the top, and the cracks were very large. They closed up when it cooled down, but it made the oven unwieldy, and it broke into pieces later on. So you want to make sure in the future that if you build an oven, not to trap the base, or else it'll crack over the top. We are definitely going to be doing some more experiments with some different ways of doing these portable oven ideas, because it's so very interesting to the public to have ovens like that at events. So make sure to keep watching as we keep experimenting with this portable oven idea. Thanks for watching.
On our episode today, we'll be making a very simple but delicious dish. It's from the 1767 cookbook, Primitive Cookery, or The Kitchen Garden Displayed. It's called Hasty Fritters. Thanks for joining us today on 18th Century Cooking with James Townsend and Son. While today's recipe comes from the cookbook Primitive Cookery, this exact recipe is in several other earlier cookbooks, so it's collected from these earlier cookbooks. Fritters are very common in 18th century cookbooks. They're basically any kind of a batter type item that's fried in fat. You can deep fry these like we're going to do today, or you can pan fry them, but typically they were deep fried, and many times they had a kind of a fruit filling to them. You'll recognize this as the ancestor to what we might call fry bread, elephant ear, donuts, all the same kind of thing. This is a very simple recipe. We're going to start off by heating up a couple of pounds of lard in our pot. You could also pan fry these in butter, but you'd want to make sure to clarify your butter first. Now let's mix some of our ingredients. This recipe uses an ale for its base. You could use a hard apple cider. If you're going to use an ale, you want one that isn't too bitter, so a brown ale makes a very good base. We're going to use about a pint here. I've got 2 cups of flour, and I'm going to very slowly add the flour into our ale mixture while stirring it up. Okay, I've got this mixed up. It's pretty thick, a pretty thick batter, almost a dough. I'm going to add in here our currants. We've got about 1/4 cup. And let's get these mixed in. And I've got 1 apple that's all diced up. We're going to add that in. Okay. Not too big a spot here. It says if you put in more than 1, you want to make sure that they don't touch each other and stick. The recipe actually calls for flipping these over with an egg slice, and you might be confused by that. An egg slice is a spatula. And these are cooking up fast. Okay, these are done. Let's pull these out. And then you finish them off by sprinkling on just a little bit of powdered sugar. Let's give it a try. You know, these are extremely simple. They only just have the flour and the ale and the fruit and a little bit of sugar up on top. But they are very, very nice. You could add a little bit more in here if they had maybe some cinnamon or some other spices. But for such a simple thing, they're wonderful. These make a great thing to make over a campfire. They're very simple. They're also great for a bonfire. If you want to have something a little special, make these in a nice fall bonfire. They are wonderful. Today we're embarking on a series of episodes where we make traditional American holiday foods, quintessential holiday foods. Now all these recipes come from Amelia Simmons's 1796 cookbook, American Cookery. The recipes that we'll be covering over the next several episodes will all build together to make a wonderful holiday feast. Thanks for joining us today on 18th Century Cooking with James Townsend and Son. We're starting our meal off with a dish that will take the longest for preparation. We're going to be cooking two different birds today for the purposes of this video, so we can show a couple of different techniques. Amelia Simmons talks about trussing and hanging a bird. Well, we're going to be cooking a turkey, the smallest turkey we could find, about 10 pounds, but he's still too big really to hang. So we're going to cook him in the tin kitchen. And for the hanging bird, we're going to use a small chicken. Amelia Simmons suggests stuffing the bird first. I do not suggest that unless you're highly experienced at getting that stuffing to cook. So what we're going to do is follow her recipe, but we're going to make a savory bread pudding in a future episode. Amelia Simmons uses a very simple technique of roasting the bird over the fire by dangling it from a string. But first, we need to truss the bird. To truss this bird, we need 4 to 5 feet of a stout cord. We now sell a hemp cordage, which is perfect for this. This is for a chicken. If you're doing a turkey, you're going to need, say, 6 to 7 feet. To truss this bird, we're going to start off with it on its stomach. We've got the neck here. I want to take the center of our cordage and I'm going to wrap it around the neck and pull it back. I'm going to flip this over. Take that string and we're going to bring it out so it comes up underneath between the wings and the legs. I've got the strings around the legs here. I'm going to come up underneath the ends of the drumsticks. I'm going to pull that around and we're going to put a half hitch right here and bring these two legs together so that they cross. Now, I'm going to make this fairly tight, but not too tight. If I draw this so tight, I won't be able to do what I need to do later. Let's finish this knot out with a square knot. There we are. Next, let's flip the bird over. We're going to do a quick overhand knot over the back, and then come back around to our neck again. Cross both the strings under it and do a quick square knot here at the back. Let's take care of the wings next. We need to tuck these wings in to keep them from flopping around and burning. Here's the elbow of the wing and the knee. We're going to put this elbow up underneath the string here, right in front of the leg. There we are. That'll keep the wing in nice and tight. Let's do this on the other side. This is why we didn't make the string too tight, but it still needs to be tight because the bird's going to shrink down and this will get looser as we go. And now let's take care of these final little wing tips here. We don't want them to burn. We're going to stuff them down inside so that they don't burn. Just take them, tuck them down in that leg joint. Now everything is all nice and tight. One last thing for this bird is a hanging string. We're going to take this string, we're going to put it up through the cavity and up around our legs here. And we can just do a real quick loop around here like that. That will hold that up. Now we've got a double strength of cordage so that our bird can hang. It's hanging breast down. So we have 3 different choices for these birds. This one we've made to hang on a string. This turkey we've got put on the spit for our tin kitchen. And our third choice would be to put this on a rotisserie, like our rotisserie set that goes with our heavy-duty fire set. The thing to remember about using it on the rotisserie with the fire set is that these birds should go beside the fire, not directly over the fire.
If you have it directly over the fire, all the drippings from the bird go directly into the fire and you can't capture them for basting, and it cooks too fast. So you want that bird off to the side where you can catch the drippings and it'll cook slowly and better without burning. I have seasoned our birds well with salt and pepper. I'm also going to put some butter in the bottom of this that we'll use for basting. I'm also going to hang our chicken. I've tied a series of knots in the string so we can adjust its height. I'm also placing a drip pan underneath with some butter in it to catch the drippings so that we can baste the bird as it cooks. We need a nice healthy fire for this, one that puts out a lot of horizontal heat. This fire is going to need to be kept up the entire time that these are cooking. To start, we're going to need to keep these birds about 12 inches from the fire so that they don't cook too fast. You can go ahead and prepare other dishes while these birds are baking. You'll want to make sure this one continues to rotate, so you can give it a spin every couple of minutes. That's all it takes to get that going. And your turkey, you should rotate, a quarter of a turn every 10 or 15 minutes. While these birds are roasting, we're going to baste them from the drippings in our pan. You may find a bird that's hung like this doesn't cook well on the top half. You can try inverting the bird, or such as we've done here, where we've sort of made him hang horizontally, and that'll help you get the other end cooked properly. After a few hours, you'll want to flour the bird. This will help crisp the skin, and I'm going to keep on basting. We've been cooking both of these birds 3.5 hours, and you can see how much faster the turkey is cooking inside the tin kitchen. I'm very amazed. The turkey's actually more done than the chicken that's hung by the fire because of the reflecting that the oven has done. If you think your bird is about done, you need to stick a nice sharp knife, into the thickest part of the thigh and see if the juices flow clear. And that'll give you a good idea. To be really sure, you should really use a meat thermometer. Stick it into the thickest part of the bird, and it should read 165 degrees. I hate to disappoint you, but I'm not going to sample this food right now. We're going to wait till we put this all together in a grand feast. Well, if you haven't watched our last episode, make sure to do so. We're working on a holiday meal series using recipes from Amelia Simmons' 1796 cookbook, American Cookery. Thanks for joining us today on 18th Century Cooking with James Townsend and Son. While these birds are finishing cooking, we're going to be working on the stuffing. Amelia Simmons suggested stuffing the bird before you roast it, but for safety purposes, we're going to be cooking this stuffing separately. For this recipe, we need 1 pound of wheat bread crumb, 3 eggs well beaten, along with 3 ounces of suet. Here I'm using a Torah suet, about 1/2 box. For spices, we'll use thyme, marjoram, salt and pepper, and we're adding a little sage. And last, I've got a gill of wine, which is about 1/2 cup. This is such a simple recipe. All we really need to do is combine these ingredients and mix them up, and then toss them in our pan. Let's get these all mixed in. We just want to get all our ingredients nice and mixed up. The pot here has already been well buttered. You don't want to pack it too tightly, just a light pack. Pack this in nicely, and then we're
We're going to bake this with the lid on. We're going to bake this about an hour and a half or an hour and 15 minutes at 350 degrees. There it is, our bread pudding. It looks wonderful, but I'm not going to sample it yet. You're going to have to wait till we put this whole meal together. We're going to do one more recipe today. I'm going to do a cranberry sauce and a cranberry tart. I love Amelia Simmons's recipe for her cranberry sauce. It's stew, strain, and sweeten. How difficult could it be, right? We're going to use the same techniques that we used when we made our currant jelly and a currant tart. So we're going to make the sauce and then a tart. Now, I'm making a double batch. I've got 2 pounds of cranberries, and I'm going to add just enough water to them to cover them. These will need to boil about 15 minutes, and as they do, you'll begin to see the skin begin to break open. These have boiled for their 15 minutes. We're going to take a masher and mash them up. You do have to remember that if you do cranberries like this, whatever you use to mash them in will permanently be stained a nice cranberry color. Okay, these are nicely mashed up. If you don't have a sieve like this, you can use a jelly bag, just like we used in the currant jelly video. Cranberry must have a lot of pectin because it's already starting to set up. Pour the contents back into our cooking pot. Let's sugar it. We need to add about equal quantities, so you're going to have to sort of guess this unless you measure exactly what you've got here. But I think we'll guess pretty well here. We're going to stick this back on the fire and let it simmer another 10 or 15 minutes. Half of this I'm going to pour into this tart tin with a paste. Any foamy skin that appears on the top of your tart, you can just skim that right off. The other half, I'm going to pour in to our little bowl here. This is our cranberry sauce, and it's going to thicken as it cools. The tart we're going to bake at 375 for about 25 minutes. Make sure the tart pan is well buttered so that the crust doesn't stick. We're not going to sample these right now. We're going to wait to put these together into this wonderful holiday feast. In our last several episodes, we've been cooking dishes most closely associated with the holiday season of Thanksgiving and Christmas here in North America. All these recipes are from Amelia Simmons's 1796 cookbook, American Cookery. Today, we'll be making a wonderful sweet potato pudding. Thanks for joining us today on 18th Century Cooking with James Townsend and Son. Amelia Simmons' recipe actually calls for winter squash or crookneck squash. But later on in the recipe, she says that you could substitute sweet potatoes, regular potatoes, or even pumpkin. I've chosen sweet potatoes simply because they're most commonly associated with Thanksgiving. To prepare your sweet potatoes, you can either bake them or boil them. If you want to take a shortcut, you can buy canned sweet potatoes. You'll need about 1.5 pounds for this recipe. For our recipe, we're also going to need 3 large apples. You'll need to pare them, core them, and chop them up, and then boil them till they're soft. Let's mash these together until they're fairly smooth. Our new hardwood masher is perfect for this job. To this, we'll add 3.5 tablespoons of breadcrumbs, 1 tablespoon of flour, 1 cup of cream, 1 tablespoon of wine, and 3 eggs well beaten. Stir this all together. I'm going to sweeten this with about 1/4 cup of sugar. To spice it, I've got a tablespoon of nutmeg and a pinch of salt. And we'll mix this in. For our final ingredient here, we're going to add 1/4 cup of black currants. These are dried black currants of the ribes family. She also suggests in her recipe that you could use Zante currants instead, which are like tiny raisins, or possibly dried blueberries, sometimes called whortleberries. And we'll mix these in. Today we're going to be cooking this in our wonderful little redware cook pot. These cook pots are available in our catalog. They're made right here in Indiana, and they're based off of 18th century paintings. Today we're going to be cooking without the lid. There's enough here in this to fill up this pot and possibly even bake a pie from it. I've got this about 3/4 of the way full. You want to leave a little bit of room. It'll try to grow as it cooks and then shrink back down. You'll want to cook this without the lid on at 325 degrees or so for 1 hour and 15 minutes, maybe 1 hour and a half. So normally about right now, I'd pull out the finished dish and we'd get to taste it, but not this time. This time I'm going to save it for later. We're going to take all these dishes and put them together into a wonderful holiday feast, so you're just going to have to wait till the end. We're right in the middle of a series. We're making an American holiday meal based off of a recipe from Amelia Simmons's 1796 cookbook, American Cookery. Today we're making her tasty Indian pudding. We're starting off with 3 cups of milk, and we're gonna scald this milk and bring it to a simmer. And then I'm going to add 1 cup of cornmeal. While this is cooking, I'm gonna keep stirring it because I don't want it to burn on the bottom. We'll know when we're starting to get there when this really starts to thicken up. What we're doing here is making basically a hasty pudding with our cornmeal. So don't get in a hurry with this. Keep this on a fairly low heat. Make sure to keep stirring it, but so that it doesn't lump up. This is really nice and thick. It's time to take it off the fire. Okay, this is already starting to thicken. We want to add our final ingredients. I've got 1 egg that's well beaten. This mixture should be warm but cool enough so that when you add your eggs, they don't get cooked. We also have a couple of ounces of butter. I have a teaspoon of salt, a teaspoon of ginger, and a teaspoon of nutmeg. Our final ingredient is 1/4 cup of molasses. We want to stir it until it's all incorporated and all the butter is melted, and then we can pour this into a mold. I'm going to use one of our Turk's hat molds. Make sure it's buttered well so that you can get it out easily. We need to bake this probably 1.5 hours or so at 325 degrees. In the last several episodes, we've been doing American holiday recipes from Amelia Simmons's 1796 cookbook, American Cookery. Today, we're going to be baking a pumpkin pudding, or as we know it, a pumpkin pie. Thanks for joining us today on 18th Century Cooking with James Townsend and Son. You know, when we first read this recipe, we really weren't quite sure. It seemed that the proportions really just weren't going to work out. But we tried it anyway, and trust us, it works. Our recipe starts off with pumpkin. It calls for 1 pint of pumpkin. The best way I've found to prep our pumpkin is to actually slice our pumpkin in half and take out the innards and then turn them upside down on a baking sheet and bake them for about an hour or so at about 350 degrees. And that gets them nice and soft, and the skin peels easily away, and we can get our pumpkin out without any work at all. If you want to cheat and do it the simple way, just buy a can of pumpkin. That'll work just as well. Looks like about half of this small pumpkin is going to be our pint. Okay, that looks really good. Now we're going to add 1 quart of milk. Now this is where it was tricky. It seemed like 1 quart of milk was going to be way too much. Let's get this mixed in here. Our mixture is very, very soupy. Now we're going to add 4 eggs that we've already whipped together. And the recipe calls for molasses. Now, she doesn't tell us exactly how much to use. I played around with this recipe a bit, and 1/2 cup is probably about right. We're not using a blackstrap molasses, but any grade of a lighter grade of molasses. Our last ingredient are spices. We're gonna need a teaspoon of ginger and a teaspoon of allspice. We're gonna pour our pie filling into our pie crust. You can use any short paste for this recipe. It'll work great. We did a previous episode on a short paste, so make sure to check that out. This recipe makes enough for probably 2 pies. This will need to bake about 1 hour and 15 minutes, maybe 1.5 hours at 325. This recipe actually calls for a lattice on top of this pie crust, but it turns out that this is so liquidy that it just sinks to the bottom, so just make this an open top pie. Boy, this pie looks great, and I love pumpkin pie. Normally I'd be digging into it right now, but we're just going to have to wait. We're gonna wait until this final episode of the series where we put together this whole feast based on the Amelia Simmons's cookbook. Today, we're finishing up our wonderful holiday feast series. All the items we've cooked here today were from Amelia Simmons's 1796 cookbook, American Cookery. Thanks for joining us today on 18th Century Cooking with James Townsend and Son. We've got some wonderful things here. I've had a lot of fun cooking these, and they smell wonderful. This is going to be great. Let me serve this up. I've got this wonderful turkey that I roasted in the reflector oven, and we've got sweet potato pudding. What would you guys like next?
Stuffy!
A tasty bread pudding. And then we have a wonderful Indian pudding.
Oh, can't wait.
There we are. Next, we have a cranberry tart and cranberry sauce that will go on the turkey. And for the grand finale, we have Amelia Simmons's pumpkin pie. Well, let's dig in, guys.
Oh.
How's that turkey, Josh?
I think the turkey is really good. Very moist, too. Well, the white meat normally ends up being dry, and it was not dry.
Right. I think it's pretty good. How was the leg? How's the leg, guys?
Wonderful.
The skin is excellent.
The cranberry sauce goes really good with it, too.
Excellent combo. What about that stuffing, Josh?
Hey, I like stuffing. Stuffing is great.
I thought the sweet potato pudding was something definitely a little different. What did you think about the sweet potato pudding?
See, if you hadn't told me about this, I would have scarfed it out even faster, because I'm not a sweet potato fan.
Ah.
Then I dug into it, and I'm like, oh, this is totally different than what I'm used to.
Well,
and the currants really add
Yeah,
It's
a little
totally
spike
changed.
of flavor
Yeah.
that you run
You're
into,
hitting
which is
into
really
it.
fun.
It's
Yeah.
not- Indian pudding's good.
Yeah,
Especially the cream really helps it though.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it could be too dry without the cream. But the tart so far is my favorite.
Really?
I know. Oh yeah. It actually tastes as good as it looks, and it's just really nice. I thought it would be a little too jelly-like, but it's really the crust is what saves it. And a nice crust.
And of course the pumpkin pie. The pumpkin pie recipe was definitely different, and I wasn't worried. I was wondering about how it would turn out, but boy, you can see it serves up very nicely, stands right up there, and tastes like a great pumpkin pie.
Yeah.
What was your favorite thing on the plate, Ivy?
The turkey.
You like the turkey best, you
Carnivore.
This meal, all this food is so wonderful. I hope we can do this again. I really want to thank all you viewers out there. I want to thank, of course, Josh and Ivy for coming and eating all this wonderful food and telling us how it worked out. I want to thank all the employees at James Townsend and Son. I want to thank all our customers. And of course, I really want to thank the crew back here that makes all these videos look so good. And I want to wish all you out there a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays.
The recipe today is called a Christmas cookie. It's from Amelia Simmons's 1796 cookbook, American Cookery. It's very interesting here, a couple of different things. The first thing is that it's called a Christmas cookie. It's not something you normally see in an English cookbook. This is an American cookbook. She's definitely got some Dutch influence here. You can also tell not only by Christmas being included in it, which isn't a normal kind of big celebration in the 18th century for English, but also the word cookie, which is a reference to the Dutch word koeken, or their version of a cookie. And the third interesting thing about this recipe is that it uses pearl ash as the leavening agent. And we have pearl ash here. It's an item that we've started carrying at the store. We have this available in little 2-ounce packages, so you can experiment with pearl ash too. Pearl ash is a refinement or a component of the alkaline potash,
Which is extracted from burning trees or other vegetable matter.
It's typically used in soap making and in dyeing and other industrial processes. But when this alkaline component is mixed with an acid in baking, you get a leavening effect. Now this recipe is a very simple one. We start off with 3.5 cups of flour. To our flour, we will add 1 cup of sugar and 3 tablespoons of powdered coriander. For a lighter texture, I will rub in about 10 ounces of butter into our floured mixture. Our wet ingredients are very simple. I have 1¼ cup of sour milk. If you don't have sour milk, you can take regular milk and add, say, a tablespoon of lemon juice or vinegar to that. To our sour milk, let's add a ½ teaspoon of our pearl ash. It needs to completely dissolve before we add it into our dry ingredients. Once this is mixed well, it should be kneaded 5 to 10 minutes. If it's too moist, add a little extra flour. Once we're done kneading this, we can roll it out to a 1/2 inch or 3/4 of an inch thick. Well, once you've got it rolled out, you can cut this into any shape you'd like. I'm just going to cut simple rectangles. Today, let's bake these in our little reflector oven. This is very similar to reflector ovens you see in the 19th century, and we think they go back to the 18th century, but we're not really quite sure exactly how far back they go. But this is a perfect little tool for baking little items like this. In a home oven, you can bake these at about 325 for, say, 25 minutes. Notice the wonderful crumb. This pearl ash makes a wonderful light and fluffy cookie.
These look great. I'm sure they taste great. Let's try them out. Wow. That coriander flavor, completely different than what you're probably used to. Very light and fluffy. These aren't too chewy. They smell really nice. You should try these cookies out. Today we're making a wonderful honey cake. Thanks for joining us today on 18th Century Cooking with James Townsend and Son. This honey cake recipe is from Amelia Simmons's 1796 cookbook, American Cookery. It is probably what we would think of as a gingerbread today. It is sweetened with honey, like many of the early gingerbread recipes were, but this one is leavened. It's leavened with pearl ash, which is not typical of early gingerbread recipes. Because this is leavened, it's got a nice and fluffy texture, unlike most of those early gingerbreads that were a very hard cake. Like our last recipe, this one's very simple. We're gonna start off with 3½ cups of flour. To our flour, I'll add 1 tablespoon of ginger, 1 tablespoon of cinnamon, and 3 tablespoons of diced candied orange peel. Let's also add 1/3 of a cup of white sugar. Now let's focus on our wet ingredients. I have 1 egg well beaten, and to this I will add 2/3 of a cup of honey. I have 1 1/4 cups of milk. Now this works best if you have sour milk. If you don't have sour milk, you can add, say, a tablespoon of lemon juice or vinegar to this. And to this milk, I will add 1/2 teaspoon of our pearl ash. It needs to completely dissolve before we add it into our dry ingredients. Finally, we'll add our milk and pearl ash mixture to the honey and egg. After kneading, let's roll these out to 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch thick. Again, you can cut these in any shape you like. We're going to cut them in a simple rectangle. For baking these, I'm going to use the tin kitchen that's in our catalog. If you're going to bake them at home, I would suggest 325 at approximately 25 minutes. These look great. Let's see how they taste. So they're very nice. They have a wonderful spicy sweet flavor with the honey. They're a little chewy, but light and fluffy. It's certainly not hard at all. You can see the wonderful crumb on these. They're nice and light and fluffy. This pearl ash is doing a great job of leavening these. They're probably extremely popular in their day. These are really, really wonderful. These make a great holiday treat. In just a little while, I'm going to be making a recipe that's very unusual and very interesting. It's not a recipe from a cookbook, but it's actually a recipe from an editorial or a letter to the editor, 1799. This episode is a companion piece to go along with our Exploring the 18th Century series, where we're talking about leavening or chemical leavening. Thanks for joining us today on 18th Century Cooking with James Townsend and Son. If you haven't watched Exploring the 18th Century, I encourage you to do so. We are discussing in depth our research into chemical leavening in the 18th century, and that will help give you a much greater context for the recipe that I'm making today. Today's recipe is for what was called American potash cake. As I've mentioned in the introduction, it's found in a letter to the editor in the London Monthly Magazine. This letter was written by Margaretta Curley, who at the time was living in New York. In her letter, Mrs. Curley expounds on the benefits of a cake that uses no yeast. Rather, she uses potash or pearl ash, which is an alkaline that reacts with an acid, creating carbon dioxide bubbles that lightens or leavens your cake as it bakes. Mrs. Curley wrote about how these cakes could be made in minutes rather than hours, and they were especially handy when yeast wasn't readily available. She also wrote about how these cakes could be made using a variety of ingredients. Today we're using her suggestion for making them with rye and molasses because sugar and white flour were scarce in various regions in North America. I'm cutting the original recipe in half, and I'm using a pound of rye flour. It's about 4 cups. You can use wheat flour if you wish. To this, I'll rub in 4 ounces or about, say, 8 tablespoons of pork lard. If you don't want to use pork lard, you can use butter instead. Once I have these combined well, I'll turn to my wet ingredients. I'll start with a cup of sour milk. Now, if you don't have sour milk, you can take fresh milk and add about a tablespoon of lemon juice or vinegar. To this, I'll add 4 ounces. That's about a half a cup of light or Barbados molasses. You really don't want to use blackstrap molasses. It's too strongly flavored. You can use 4 ounces or a half a cup of sugar instead if you wish. Now, before I'll add our dry and wet ingredients together, I'll take a half a teaspoon of pearl ash and dissolve it completely in a quarter of a cup of water. Add this to your milk mixture and quickly add that to your flour. We now offer pearl ash at James Townsend & Son. You can substitute baking soda, but that is a mid-19th century invention. Mix this until blended and then turn out onto a floured surface. Roll it out to about a half or 3/4 of an inch thick. You can cut these any shape you wish. I'm using a biscuit cutter. You'll want to bake these at about 400 degrees for 16 to 18 minutes. Now notice the crumb on this. It's very light and fluffy. That's definitely the work of the pearl ash. Well, it's got a really nice flavor, a bit like, say, a breakfast biscuit. But with the molasses and the rye flour, it's definitely got a nuttier flavor. And one of the interesting things I thought about this recipe was that there was no salt. So you can tell it's a little lacking in salt, but really not bad at all. I think that potassium in the pearl ash really helps give it a little bit of salty flavor anyway. Now I went ahead and also made a recipe using regular wheat flour instead of rye flour and using butter instead of lard. Now that rye and lard flour version is very inexpensive. This is a more expensive version, but let's see how this turned out. It's got sugar instead of molasses too, so it's missing that molasses flavor. Much more like what you would expect as a modern sort of breakfast biscuits. It's a little bit sweeter. Actually it almost reminds me of shortbread that you would use for strawberry shortbread. It's kind of that sweet and that kind of yummy. This recipe of Mrs. Curley's in 1799 in this London Monthly Magazine gives us a great little snapshot of something that's going on
right there in the Hudson River Valley, where we see this knowledge being spread. This from the Dutch community, probably right there in the mid-18th century, and it spreads, where she's giving that knowledge about how you can leaven breads, not with just yeast, but with this new method. Anyway, a couple of years later, the recipe was published in the Domestic Encyclopedia of London. In 1808, Duncan MacDonald picked up the recipe and included it in his cookbook, The New London Family Cook. And while chemical leavening was much more quickly accepted in North America than in Great Britain, it does begin to slowly emerge in the 1820s and 30s in English cookbooks. In this episode, I'm taking a step into the future. Well, not really so much the future. Normally, we focus on the 18th century. In this episode, we're going to be doing an early 19th century recipe. The recipe I'm making today is from John Cook's 1824 cookbook, Cooking and Confectionery. It's what's called a light gingerbread. I'll explain in a minute exactly why this is so special. Thanks for joining us today on 18th Century Cooking with James Townsend and Son. So while this recipe that we're doing today is actually a fairly simple, common sort of gingerbread, one of the interesting things is it uses alum as one of the leavening agents. So in our Exploring the 18th Century chemical leavening series, we talked about bread adulterants in the mid-18th century and how there was great alarm at the bakers using alum in their bread. And yet here we have an early 19th century recipe that's using alum as a leavening agent. The original recipe is rather large, so I've downsized this considerably. We're going to start with 2 cups of flour. To this, I'll stir in 2 teaspoons of powdered ginger. Next, I'll add 1 cup of light or Barbados molasses. Warming this first will make it easier to mix into the flour. Now for our wet ingredients, I'll take a few tablespoons of milk, divided evenly. In half of this milk, I'll dissolve 3/4 of a teaspoon of pearl ash. In the other half, I'll dissolve 1 teaspoon of alum. Pearl ash can be very difficult to find, so James Townsend and Son now carries food-grade pearl ash in 2-ounce bottles. You can substitute it with baking soda, but baking soda was a mid-19th century invention. Alum can be found in the spice section in your local grocer. If you would prefer not to use alum, you can use a couple tablespoons of vinegar instead. And I'll stir this in very well. The result is a very sticky batter. I'm going to bake this in a tart tin that has been well buttered. If you're baking this at home, you'll want to preheat your oven and bake this at 400 degrees for about 15 minutes. We gotta give this a try. Very wonderful, very fluffy. It's got a great gingerbread taste with the mix between the ginger and the molasses. This is an excellent, very interesting, almost like a ginger cake. Very moist though. This is really something special. If you haven't watched our Exploring the 18th Century series on chemical leavening, I really invite you to do so. It really helps tease out and get to the roots of chemical leavening all throughout the 18th and 19th century.